Hey, welcome to the lab. This is part 2 of the series Creating a Blog Using Go. In this episode, we're going to be adding a database. We're going to be adding some basic styling so we can actually start showing this to users. Alright, so to get started, we're going to be adding a database. And the database we're going to use is called sqlite. If you're not familiar, it's simply a file on your system. It's super fast and it's super easy to get started with. For now, we don't really need anything other than read operations, something to store the metadata for our articles in, and then query that information out. Since it's a file, we can just pack it alongside a binary. We can add it to a Docker image. It becomes super convenient. If you want to add something like subscribers to insert an update operation, you do need to be a little bit more careful. Like you don't want to corrupt the file, you need to keep it in sync, you need to have it in a specific place. We don't want to deal with that for now. Let's just keep it super simple and provide us with something we can like query and store some meta information. So to do this, you simply just go in and say touch blog.db or however you wanna go about it. You still need to install it, figure that out. It's literally just a Google search away. But with that in place, we are ready to add migrations so we can add some structure to our databases. And to do this, we're going to be using a tool called Goose. Goose is a database migration tool. As you can see here, it manages our database schema. It works well with SQLite, Postgres, MySQL. And what it does essentially is creating a SQL file for us that contains what is called an up migration and a down migration. This allows us to go back in time if we need to, if we have made a mistake and we need to go back, fix our changes, and then continue forward again. And what it essentially is a CLI tool that once you run this command, you can see here under install, you'll be able to generate these SQL file, you'll be able to apply the migrations, go back down the versions. So go ahead and install this CLI tool right here. And then with that installed, we can simply say goose, point it to a migration directory, and then create whatever file we need to create. But as you can see, we need a migrations directory. So let's just create that first and then run command. And now we have created the file. Great. So you can see here we have the file with the timestamp and the name that we provided. So we need to provide it with an up version and a down version, and the up version is what we want to create now. So alright, so we create an ID that we're going to use as an integer. I would prefer this to use an UUID, since now that is an integer, it will be incrementally increasing every time. So people could theoretically or technically start to guess which article is next in line because it's just an increasing number. You will need to install an extension to SQLite to use UUID. So we're going to use an integer for now, but be aware that you could look into using UUIDs instead. We then simply created an updated column, create a title, the slug, the file name, what we essentially already have, but in the article package that we created in last episode, but now it's just in a database. So next up is that we need to create the down version. And this one simply just deletes the table. So with this in place, we should now be able to say goose and not create, but run the up version. Hopefully this works. It does. We can see it has been successfully migrated. And if we open the blog.db file, there's something happening to it. Yeah, we can see something happening to it, and that's what we want to see. So we can actually jump back now because we also want to check if the down version works. So instead of saying up, we can say down, and that had also been applied. Great. But yeah, let's have the up version running so we have the structure in place and we can start adding some records to our table. So open up your database editor or whatever you want. I'm going to use deadbot and I have some saved queues here. And as you can see, we just give it a little bit more space here. We have no records in our database, but we can just run these two commands here. And now we have some records in our database. That's great. Next step is that we need some way to get the information out of the database. Some use ORMs. I am not a big fan. I don't really think they provide you with much. I prefer to use raw SQL. And a tool that lets us use raw SQL but still have all the type safety and familiarity that we have with Go is something called sqlc. And if you go in here and look, sqlc docs, I think it is. There we go. Yeah. Maybe let's just grab let's go back and grab this is the official website, right? So to get started, we need to go in and see so you see they also have support for MySQL and Postgres. We are gonna need MySQL. And here they either want a YAML file or a JSON file. We are gonna be using a JSON file, so let's just create that. And it was sqlc.yaml. There we go, and then we simply just fill it out as per the documentation. And there we go. This should pretty much line up with what we have here. The only difference is I put it into a SQL file and then a subdirectory for all the queries. And the queries right here is where we're gonna have all of the raw normal SQL files. So we also need to create those two. So let's say make dir SQLite and queries. Right. Next up, to start creating these, we just need to actually provide it with the SQL. So under SQLite queries, we create a file called articles.sql. And then we can say it's this one. Now, what the syntax for doing this with sqlc is provide a little comment here that says the name, and we're going to be calling it query articles, and then how many records we expect to get. So we need two things here. We need the query articles to get all of the articles out, and then we also need the query articles by slug. So this is quite straightforward. Right, and then the query articles. Query article by slug. And again, here we only want to have one. So say articles where slug equals question mark, I believe it is. Now to generate this, we need another another CLI tool. And I should find it here, right? Yeah, so they have different options, and just as with Goose, you can install this using this install command. So if you do that and have this in place, we should now be able to say sqlc generate. Hopefully, it seems to have worked. Now under SQLite, we can see we now have DB, which is just some interfaces and some setups. We also have models, which is the article, the database representation of the article, right? And then we also have this thing right here. And this is really where the magic of sqlc happens, is that this is simply just a function, a Go function that we are used to a method on a struct. So this becomes super easy to integrate into the rest of the code base. So now we are almost ready to start querying querying the records out of our database. We just need to do a little bit of setup in our main.go file. So we need to create a function to set up the connection. And then see, we just create like a small helper function here that returns a pointer to our sql.db file. Sorry, not sql.db, but sql.db type. Yeah. And this simply says db error equals. All right, so we simply just use SQL to open a connection to a database, and our database is just a file we created earlier. So now we can go up here and say database connection. And as you might have seen, we panic down here, and this is a setup function, so we want to panic early on. Normally we return an error, but here, since it's set up, panic is perfectly valid way to go. And this gives us either panic or the connection. And now if we say sqlite, in here we should have a new function that we can provide with the database connection, which returns us what essentially is our database. So you can see now that we have db, and we can say query by articles, query by slug. That's great. One final thing we need before we can run this is we need to have a driver. And this is what is called like a blank import in Go. This gives us all the, under the hood, the drivers and the functions that we need to actually run SQLite as part of our application. So for now, let's just say db, and we should have a ping. We do not. All right. We can also just simply add it to our home handler, saying db, which is a pointer to sql.queries. And we no longer say get assets, we say db.query articles, and we give it the request context. There we go. And I messed up right here. And now our home view is complaining because it expects a string. We of course want to give it the models that we just generated. So let's go into our home view and say, give me a slice of what's essentially gonna be sqlite.article. And then in here we say slug and title, and then again templ generate in.go. We might have to restart our LSP to make it work. All right, it's still complaining, but if we go ahead and say return home handler, now so we should be able to say go run main.go. We are, and now if we open localhost 8080, we still get our articles out. So that is still like what we expected. So let's implement this for our article handler as well. We still need the parser, but we're gonna be pulling out the information from our database instead. So we're adding queries, and then we want to say, instead of article here, maybe we say article content. And we grab the actual article, query by slug. Again, we do the request context and then provide it with the slug, return an error. Again, it complains, so we need to update the view. And it's this one. Now, since we actually have the proper title information, let's just go ahead and request the title. And let's call this content. Right? And let's simply showcase the title now instead of article page. Yes, all right. And let's just say templ generate. And now, okay, it's still not, sometimes templ doesn't really work too well with my LSB, but doesn't matter. We know that it needs a title and the past article content. So now we can say go run main.go once more. We cannot, because we of course need to pass the database as well. Let's try again. It runs, we update it, still working. Now let's click and see if we get something back. And you can see now we have the article title showing up, we have the content. Can we also do this? We can. So that's great. We have some records in our database. We are using them in our handlers. Now, this still looks like complete shit. We need to do something about the styling here, because our users is not going to be reading articles when things look like this. So to do this, we're going to be adding Tailwind. And if you're not familiar with Tailwind, it's a utility-first CSS framework. It makes it really easy to build UIs and maintain UIs over time. So let's go ahead and go into the Get Started documentation and see what we need. So to kick this off, we need to install Tailwind, of course. And for that, we're going to be needing a package.json files, which we can emit with these things right here. And that all looks good. Next up, we need to install it as a developer dependency. Great. And init the Tailwind CSS file. Yeah. And with that in place, we now need to tell Tailwind where it needs to look for all of these utility CSS classes. And that is, of course, going to be in our use folder, and then everything that has a templ extension, Tailwind will now watch and grab those CSS classes and chuck them into like a final output CSS file. To say next step, we need to provide a input file, or I like to call it base CSS file. No, that's not it. There we go. And then we need to start the build process. We are not going to be using watch. You would use watch in development because it continuously looks for changes and then recompiles or rebuilds the CSS file. We just need to generate like the build, the optimized CSS for now. So if you open up package.json, that's the wrong one. We need scripts, there we go. All right. And to do this, we're gonna create something called builds CSS. We'll then say npx Tailwind CSS input, and the input is just gonna be the base CSS file. And the output is gonna be static CSS. Let's just call it output. .css, and then it's gonna be minify, I believe it is. Now we need to create this folder structure here, and you see later on that we're going to be using embed to also put our static files in our binary, so again it becomes super easy to serve and host it. We're going to be using like a subpath here because you might want to add some some JavaScript or some images later on that you can also put in here. So let's go ahead and create static.css/css, and then we should be able to run build CSS hopefully. And we are. It complains about no utility classes. That's expected. We haven't added anyone yet. So before we can begin using the style sheet, we need it to be served somewhere or hosted somewhere. And for that, we can use our go embed once more, just as we did with our articles. And we're going to be embedding the entire static directory. So if we want to include JavaScript, images, and so on, in one point in the future, it's very easy to do so. And now we need to tell Echo about this. And we need to do this little thing before, so we can actually use the static as a prefix in a URL. Static, and then we say echo static file system / static and file system. Great. Now if you go and run our server once more, you can go to local host 8080 static CSS output CSS and nothing. Great. And I misspelled it, of course. Now let's try and give this a refresh. And there we go. So now we're ready to style our pages. And to do so, we're going to be adding this thing to our base.templ place. So the style sheet is included in every page automatically. And we simply say link style sheet and it's the static CSS output CSS. And now once more, let's run the application and we should see some changes. So if we go up to just the home page and we can see that we have, of course, not included because I forgot to run templ generate. Now let's sound refresh and we can see something happened. Not a lot happened, but something happened. We have something being applied, and this is Tailwind's resets that's being applied now. So we're not going to be adding a whole lot of styling, just a little bit to see how it works. So let's go ahead and add some background color. Let's sync, make it a gray to the base template, and then let's go into home. And let's remove this, and then we're gonna wrap this one in something called a container. If you're not familiar with CSS, sorry, not CSS, Tailwind CSS, you can check out the docs. They're very, very thorough. So here we're just gonna set a max width. We're gonna be adding, we're gonna be centering the content, and we're gonna be providing some air to the top of the content, like so. And in down here, let's just say border around it. Gonna make them into little boxes. Py is gonna be 4. We're gonna add some padding on the y-axis and the x-axis. Are we gonna do anything else? I don't think so, no. Next, let's just go into our article here. Again, we're gonna wrap it on a container and we're gonna center it like before. Auto, and we set empty 14, I believe. Yeah. Let's make this title a little bit bigger. 2XL. Okay. So let's compile this and then see how it looks. Generate and go run main.go. It's something. We still should probably have a header. Let's just add that really quick. My latest articles. This one should probably also just have a little bit more size increase, XL. And these ones should probably have some space between them. Once more, build, generate and run. How does that look? Not the best ever, but you know, we can see some styling being applied now, and it's all served through our own application. It's packaged in the binary. You're gonna have such an easy time deploying this. So let's check the article page, and we can see sort of the same thing here. Now, Tailwind has a bunch of plugins, and if we go to the plugin page, we can see they have something here for typography. Let's go in and add that because it provides us with some defaults, so it makes content a bit more readable. It provides some default spacing and those type of things. That's really, really nice. So let's see, we just need to grab this thing here and add it to our developer dependencies, and then we needed to go in and grab this one and add it to the plugin list in the config file, right? Yes. And I can't spell now. Let's go back and grab it. There we go. There's no formatting, it's okay. Once more, we need to do some more before we do that. That's right. So we need to change this to an article tag. We don't need to, but it's good practice. And then we're gonna say class, and we're gonna say pros. I'm gonna say LG pros XL. And let's also just change the leading to normal. And this should be its pros. Yes, it looks like. Great. Now let's just go ahead and not install, but npm run builds. Templ generates, and once more go run me.go. And we can see that it got a little bit more space. All of this is in one paragraph tag, so let's actually try and kill the server once more and go into our articles. It's under what? Articles, this one. Let's add some spaces between, and it should get changed a bit. Now let's see. You can see here we get a lot more space, and it's because it gets passed into paragraph tags that has some automatic styling applied. So it gets a little bit more air. And you don't really need to do that much more. Of course, do some more design on this, but for readability's sake, this is probably where you want to be. So that's it. The next episode, we're going to be discussing different deployment options, so you can actually get this live, get this shown to some users, and do a little bit of SEO work. But yeah, that's it for now. See you.